Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Hero Movie Podcast, your greatest source for superhero movie discussion in the multiverse. I am your host, Adam Portrais, and I'm joined by Sweet Shanzi from the internet.
Is this a cartoon?
And of course, Bruce Leslie.
I'm a prickly pear. I have a beard? Since when did I have a beard?
Almost as long. I can say there are a couple of times where I did know you without a beard, and I think I can speak for all of us when I say thanks for the beard. Good job.
You're welcome.
You're doing the Lord's work over there with the beard, Bruce. We really appreciate it. So, but this week we are covering the Adventures of Tintin from 2011. Holy cow! I did not realize that this movie was that long ago. We actually put this one up for a vote over at patreon.com/HMP not too long ago, and I think it came in second place. So we were like, you know what? It's available on Netflix as we record this. So let's jump into that Steven Spielberg classic. Well, we're going to be doing that today. But again, we do want to say a big giant thank you to everyone who supports us over at patreon.com/HMP. For those of you that do that, you get the pre-show, post-show, and of course, the Dinger Zone, where we discuss all kinds of fanciful fun stuff that you will get there and there alone. And again, like we say with everything, you could be listening to us talk about mattresses if those people wanted to give us money, but they don't, and that's where you come into play. Whatever you think that this show is worth, just head on over to patreon.com/HMP and help the show out and get yourself some more quality content. In the meantime, we really appreciate that. Patreon.com/HMP. As I said, this week we.
Snowy. A unicorn.
That's a very unique specimen, that is. Finest ship has ever sailed the seven seas.
How much for the boat?
It's not for sale.
You're about to walk into a whole mess of danger.
Something happened on this ship. What secrets do you hold? What's this? That model ship conceals a clue to one of the greatest treasures in all history. Good boy, Snowy. Are you going to take charge of this evidence?
Never fear, Tintin. The evidence is safe with us.
Thompson, where are you?
Oh, well, I'm already downstairs. Do try to keep up.
He has no idea what's coming.
You know the value of that scroll. I will find it, with or without your help.
Thanks, from Tintin, by the way.
Haddock. Archibald Haddock.
Find them.
Find them both.
Put your hands up. You do know what you're doing, eh?
Relax. I interviewed a pilot once.
I swear I'll find that treasure before him.
What have you done?
A little wee fire.
In a boat! Well, this is a fine mess.
Nobody takes my ship.
This may sound crazy, but I've got a plan.
Excellent.
Land! We're not there yet!
No! Land!
Did you hit anything?
Oh, dear. I won't pretend!
Can't turn back. Not now. Not now.
All right, that is the trailer for Tintin, our retro review here of this week. Well, let's get to it, boys and girls. You know how this works.
It's time for Bruce's Comic Book Connection.
Oh, I wonder what the under-over is on how many times Bruce will try to do some sort of accent during this one. Let's find out.
Oh, I hope you took the under. I had this really good friend. He was my neighbor when I lived in Charlotte. He was a French guy. He had lived in L.A. for a while. He had been a struggling actor when he was out there. He also had a black belt in karate. And one of his greatest accomplishments was briefly convincing his son that he was Jean-Claude Van Damme. Yeah, that's a true story. But one thing I remember most fondly about him was that he was a huge Tintin fan, or as he called it, Tintin. He grew up reading Tintin comics because Tintin comics were huge in France. The Adventures of Tintin ran in 24 volumes that were published from 1929 to 1976, created by Belgian cartoonist Georges Remy, who wrote under the pen name Hergé. The series was one of the most popular European comics of the 20th century. The title character is a teenaged reporter and adventurer with a characteristic round face and something called a quiff hairdo. The quiff is a hairstyle that combines the pompadour hairstyle with the flat top and never goes out of style. Always having a nose for international news, Tintin finds himself in many a pickle. But through his investigative reporting, quick thinking, and all-around good nature, Tintin is always able to solve the mystery and complete the adventure. While Hergé was a student during World War I, he began doodling in the margins of his schoolwork. His doodles were a simply drawn boy using his wits to battle the German occupiers. Hergé was also influenced by the physical appearance and mannerisms of his younger brother Paul, who had a round face and a quiff hairstyle. As for the name Tintin, folks have pointed to the 1898 illustrated story by French illustrator Benjamin Rabier titled Tintin Lutin, which means Tintin the Goblin, in which they featured a small goblin boy named Tintin who had a rounded face and, yes, a quiff hairdo, because like I said, they never go out of style. Now, Hergé claimed that Rabier's manner of drawing animals had influenced him, although he swore that he was unaware of the existence of Tintin Lutin until one of his readers informed him of the similarity in 1970. Hergé was also a Belgian Boy Scout as a youth, and he has admitted that his adventures and Scout's honor are communicated in the Adventures of Tintin. Fully aware of the new style of comics emerging in the USA in 1929, Hergé was ready to try it. Tintin's new comic would be a strip cartoon with dialogue in speech bubbles and drawings that carried the story, making it perhaps the first comic-style sequential art in Europe. Of course, no boy journalist can chase adventure around the globe without a companion, so the white fox terrier Snowy is always at his side. This freckle-faced adventurer made a splash with his first story arc in Tintin in the Land of the Soviets. And as you may guess, this story involves Tintin going to the Soviet Union. A Russian agent sabotages his train. Tintin gets blamed for the dastardly deed. He has to escape into the USSR. And then he gets chased by the Bolsheviks until he escapes out of the USSR and back into Berlin. And it's a good thing that he didn't stick around for a little while in Berlin because, you know, things weren't so safe there. But Europe really was turbulent in the first half of the 20th century. Tintin's final adventure was published in the 1970s, and his 40-plus year career saw him going from blowing up a rhinoceros with dynamite to actually protecting the habitats of endangered species. Hergé died in 1983, but his legacy of Tintin lives on. English novelist Harry Thompson said, Tintin is almost featureless, ageless, sexless, and did not appear to be burdened with a personality, yet this very anonymity remains the key to Tintin's gigantic international success. With so little to mark him, anybody from Curacao to Coventry can identify with him and live out his adventures. Millions have done so, both adults and children, including the likes of Steven Spielberg, Andy Warhol, Wim Wenders, Francois Sagan, Harold Macmillan, and General Charles de Gaulle, who considered Tintin his only international rival. Brussels contains a life-size bronze statue of Tintin and his fox terrier Snowy just outside of the Comics Cafe. And there have been 2 live-action movies, 2 animated TV shows, and no less than 6 animated movies, the most recent of which, of course, is Steven Spielberg's 2011 classic inspired by 3 volumes of the Tintin series, The Crab with the Golden Claws from 1941, The Secret of the Unicorn from 1943, and Red Rackham's Treasure from 1944. Now, the movie may have failed to make Tintin a household name here in the States, but at least it got us good guys at H&P to talk about the freckle-faced punk.
Now, I figure that it just seems like a book that you probably read or at least had some knowledge of, you know, previous to all this, Bruce. This seems like one of those kind of classics that's up your alley.
It's one of those classics, but rather than having really read any of the books, it was just like the figure was kind of identifiable. Like I'd seen lots of single panels, but I'd never really read a whole story.
That's kind of how I was growing up. Yeah, seeing them like wizards.
Like Betty Boop, you know. I've seen lots of pictures of Betty Boop. Haven't really watched any Betty Boop cartoons.
Sean, familiar at all? Previous?
Yeah. I'm fairly familiar, actually. I spent a majority of my youth in hostels across Europe, and whenever but I do know the story. I know a bit about Tintin, but I can't tell you how I know it. I'm guessing through the books, but I don't even know.
Yeah, it's like something you probably at some point, like in the 80s, maybe even early 90s, you saw something with a Tintin face drawn on it or something. You kind of recognize it without knowing the whole backstory.
Well, I mean, I knew stories, like full stories, which tells me that I probably had a Tintin book or two when I was like very, very young, but I was too young to even remember. Yeah. But I do know, I knew all of these characters before I saw this movie, and it was very familiar. You know what I mean? And so I knew, like, I know a bit of it, which tells me that, at some point, probably one of my parents bought me a book about Tintin, and, it was in the regular, like, oh, we're going to read this every couple months kind of a thing, which would make sense. The way that this character is, the way he looks, the way he is drawn is very simple. He has sort of a Little Orphan Annie quality to him, where like it's very simple. Everything about him is simple.
Exactly. The iconography of it's very heavy,
and you follow him through this.
And I feel pretty sure that some like newspapers in larger U.S. cities probably translated versions of the comic strips too.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Though I can't swear to it. I don't think I've ever seen it firsthand, but it would make sense. I'm also kind of surprised that all the animated series that they had, that none of them got like translated to English and put on some of the lesser cable stations in the like 80s and 90s when cable stations were looking for stuff to fill, because we got so much Japanese stuff that was translated and put on TV.
We got freaking Caillou. Like we get Caillou, but not Tintin.
Yeah, that kind of surprises me. Like that should be something that we ran across as kids that I don't think we ever did.
So without setting fire to the source material, because the source material is great. I think that all three of us can agree on that. Mm-hmm. Like, it's pretty unimpeachable and pretty great, the source material. Do you like this movie?
I found it very boring.
I did too.
Well, I found aspects of it to be good and other aspects to be a little bit draining, and I think a lot of it is the fact that it is kind of a 3D, almost to real life kind of, your thing in the beginning of the show was like, is this really a cartoon? Is kind of up for question, because it is that, but it's clearly not as well. So this movie's actually so it's directed by Steven Spielberg, screenplay by Stephen Moffat, Edgar Wright, and Joe Cornish. Initially, I
love Edgar Wright and Joe Cornish. I love those two guys.
Great combination there. And this was originally going to be a Peter Jackson thing for a good while, and that's why you see Wingnut Films involved with this as well, is because Peter Jackson was...
why it feels overstuffed and ridiculous?
A little bit, probably. That's probably on account, I would say. But yeah, and again, I thought also at the same time, too, that they may have thought, hey, this could be our one swing at this. Let's try to jam it all in. And apparently, according to what we've seen, it seems to be their only swing at this. So, hey, maybe they got in as much as they could in the time with which they could.
This is not the first time I've seen this. This is the second time I've seen this. The first time was actually with that friend of mine who is a big Tintin fan, watched it, in his home video room at his house. I did not remember just how photorealistic this animation was, this CGI, this mocap stuff that they did. Watching it the second time around, I was really impressed. I had remembered it being just more like your typical kind of like Clone Wars style animation.
No, for 2011 especially, like, this looks really, really good. I don't think that you can... I'm sure the stylization points can certainly be argued, but from a quality perspective, I don't know that anyone looks at this and go like, oh, they kind of, half measures over here just to make it all work. No, they pulled out all the stops.
Well,
I mean,
they also figured out the Uncanny Valley thing because there is no Uncanny Valley in this movie.
What I was going to say is they've actually come out the other end of the Uncanny Valley. That's how good this is. You know, you compare this to something like Polar Express, and it's, you know, some of the same people worked on these, but this has gone through the valley and came out on the other side. I'm
Zemeckis, I am pissed because basically it means that Spielberg was using Zemeckis as basically the first cow. We're like, go ahead. No, you go ahead and try doing that. And then they saw what worked and what didn't work with, you know, what the 2 or 3 terrible Robert Zemeckis, like completely computer animated movies he made. It was like, okay, so we know what works and doesn't work. Let's make a movie.
Yeah, I heard that Robert Zemeckis owed Steven Spielberg one anyway, so I guess he took it on the chin. but I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen. I don't think we've seen anything that looks quite like this since this came out. Like I would think this would be whether the movie didn't do bad, but whether you like the story or not, this animation looks like something that should have been built on and continued, and I don't think that's happened. I think this looks better than the last Pixar movies I've seen, which is crazy because I thought Pixar was like the state of the art for this kind of animation.
Explain yourself when you say that. So what are the last movies that you've seen from Pixar?
It would be Toy Story 4.
Okay.
And, you know, you can see the improvement with each of the Toy Story movies, particularly with things like hair on a stuffed animal or fur on a stuffed animal, whatever. But this really, really, you have to stop and ask, like, is this a guy in a rubber mask occasionally? Like it's pretty crazy how convincing this animation is. And I feel like it has some photorealistic moments that Pixar doesn't have. In fact, maybe they steer away from that intentionally because they still want it to feel like animation. But I would
say that they do because, you know, one of the things about this movie is that, at least for me, I'm not going to speak for you guys, is that my brain clicks off after a while where like there's sort of a fever dream thing happening with this movie where after a while it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. Everyone's screaming and everything's always happening and there's a whole lot going on. Because that is the other part to this movie too, is that it has what I call the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids problem, which is if you're watching Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, like it doesn't bother you, but when you're only listening to it, because I used to work in a video store and we would have to play Honey, I Shrunk the Kids every day. Yeah. You know, that is a beloved movie, but that movie is just kids screaming for 2 hours.
That's true. When you get,
that's kind of what this is. It's just Haddock screaming for 2 hours in this movie.
Yeah. And something else that sets this apart in a way, and I don't necessarily mean in a good or a bad way, but comparing this to Pixar is actually animation. This is all mocap. Like these actors acted this stuff out in mocap, you know, so it's Andy Serkis style, which is fitting that he's Haddock.
Well, and that's one of the big reasons they got him. Of course, I mean, even in 2011 here, he's still kind of one of the, you know, the guys to go to with all this. I mean, the guy who, you know, brought Gollum to life and made everybody just go, oh, this is the best CGI character that's, you know, existed to this point. Surely that guy's going to know enough to do this. So much so that he's, you know, directing other people and doing all of this kind of stuff, running second unit for, you know, Peter Jackson and all this kind of jazz. So, yeah, there's no doubt that they would get him aboard for this. One thing that I guess this time around that I don't know why it didn't sink in for me as well, and I think it's because the animation is so good, is how good Daniel Craig actually is in this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say you don't ever think for a moment, hey, that's Daniel Craig.
No, but, and only if you listen really well can you go, oh, I can pick it out now. But like outside of that, you know, you feel like this is a kind of a wholly original character and everything, and you buy it, even despite the comedically sized, you know, proportions to everyone's bodies and stuff.
And we've seen Daniel Craig, though, do enough different things that I don't think anybody's surprised by that. The guy's really good at that.
Yeah, but again, I think 2011, we hadn't seen quite as much as that. Like, because today you're like, oh, this guy does a lot of different stuff. From, you know, your performance in Knives Out is different from, you know, obviously Bond and what was the what was the race movie? Like that character's name?
Logan Lucky.
Logan Lucky's character, and that, like, he's got a lot of different speeds to that. He's got a lot of gears that he can go through. That Daniel Craig, and I thought it was a bit impressive in this one. I was like, oh yeah, that's Daniel Craig in this flick.
I know somebody who worked on Logan Lucky. Really cool guy. You know what's interesting is that the Daniel Craig character, like the character design of him, looks a whole lot more like Timothy Dalton than he looks like.
He does, yeah.
That was maybe their first choice. Who knows? One thing I'm going to say is they were really swinging for the fences with this. When you look at the team they put together, starting with Spielberg and Peter Jackson and Kathleen Kennedy, and then the writers that you had mentioned there, Moffat and Edgar Wright, Joe Cornish. They weren't pinching any pennies on this production. I wasn't surprised when I saw that Spielberg basically bought the rights like a month before Hergé died. He's been sitting on this property since 1983.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, it was something he wanted to do for a very long time. He was a big fan of the comics back in the day, so this was kind of a passion project for him in a lot of ways.
And some of these stories are apocryphal, but I think it was 1981 when he started reading the comics is what I'd read, and it's because he read a review for Raiders of the Lost Ark, look in the paper, and they said Raiders of the Lost Ark is like Tintin for Americans. So he went out and checked out Tintin and kind of fell in love with the idea that Tintin is Indiana Jones for kids instead of thinking of Indiana Jones as Tintin for Americans. But I also read he really had Jack Nicholson in mind to play Haddock. And this would have been a non-animated version. This would have been a live-action version that he's working on in the 80s.
He's got too much menace, man. Jack Nicholson has way too much menace to be that character.
I could absolutely believe he was drunk all the time, though.
That guy likes the sauce.
And in the sort of cringy, uncomfortable department, the person that Spielberg had to sort of outbid to get these rights was Roman Polanski.
Oh, in the 80s, still working pretty big and everything. So, yeah.
I don't know if he needs to be making children's movies, but yeah.
Probably not. But now we've had mixed thoughts about him in the past. What do you guys think about Jamie Bell as the titular role of Tintin?
Well, here's the thing with Jamie Bell for me is that Jamie Bell is an incredibly talented person. He's a triple threat. He can basically do anything. He has the ability to make his body, like he has full command of his body, right? Which is very impressive, and he can act. The problem with Jamie Bell is that Jamie Bell is a massive a-hole. And the reason why you know that is because someone who is this bloody talented doesn't work on literally everything, and he should. And so that is the issue when it comes to him in this movie, even, is that Tintin is supposed to be, for lack of a better term, a pure of heart. And Jamie Bell is certainly not that. And so it kind of tints the performance to me.
And Tintin is also supposed to be like unflavored yogurt, very vanilla, very, very blank slate. And I think Jamie Bell does do a decent job of being blank slate here. I like him better as a voice actor, mocap actor, than I do, in the roles where we actually see him on screen. What I'm curious about is the person Jamie Bell replaced. They were going to start working on this in 2008, and it got delayed a little bit. But the original Tintin was Thomas Brody Sangster. Do you guys know who that is?
No.
He's the kid from Love Actually. He's Jojen Reed on Game of Thrones. But,
oh, wow, really?
Yeah, by the time they actually got to work producing this movie, he was already cast on Game of Thrones, I believe. So he was not available, wow. And that's when Jamie Bell was pulled in, because Jamie Bell had a small role in the Peter Jackson King Kong. So Peter Jackson recommended him. But I would have been kind of curious to see how this would have gone down with Thomas Brody Sangster, because he kind of looks like Tintin. He kind of has that look.
Yeah, a little bit.
And Nick Frost and Simon Pegg as the Thompson and Thompson, the Thompson twins, I guess you'd call them.
I had to look up that kid. You're right. He does look like Tintin. He would have been something else.
Yeah, I figured you might have remembered the kid from Love Actually, because I know you weren't much of a Game of Thrones guy. But yeah, he's got a pretty memorable face. Once you see it, you don't forget it.
I will say this though, like one of the few problems that I had with some of the animation was that I felt like Tintin's face was not expressive enough in comparison to the other members of the cast.
Once again, like micro mocap, maybe Jamie Bell just had a flat affect when he was working.
I guess, but at the same time, too, you still can't, like, because that's what, there's a lot of argument with the mocap performances and stuff. It's like, do we nominate, Andy Serkis as Caesar, even though, like, he did do all the acting, there is a level of performance that is also computer generated on top of him.
Can be sweetened.
Can we give him that thing? So, they could sweeten up Jamie Bell's performance there and, kind of make him do whatever they want, but they kind of kept the affectation a little bit more flat than I would have liked, because I would like to feel like there's a little bit more emotion coming out of this character, because I think that's one of the little problems with this, is that, like, I don't feel like he's ever really having to struggle too awful much. The term that's been fun over the last couple years is Mary Sue, and Tintin is exactly that. Hardly anything goes wrong for that kid.
I'd refer back to that quote from Harry Thompson that I had in the comic book connection, is that Tintin never appeared to be burdened with a personality. So I think that's in the source material, and it comes through here.
Maybe it's my American sensibilities of wanting people to act. What a jerk I am.
I think that Spielberg might know a thing or two about directing. I don't know. I mean, he's still kind of figuring things out.
Yeah.
But maybe because we have such an over-the-top out of Andy Serkis. I mean, you couldn't have Haddock. Like, you got to have the straight guy. If you're going to have this team of Tintin and Captain Haddock, Tintin kind of has to be almost flat affected, a blank face, because Haddock is just a pure off the. No,
and I absolutely agree. I'm just saying, turn it up 10%. That's all. I don't need him to go to Havoc levels. I just need him to, like, get a little worry behind your eyes. Make me feel like you're at least in a little bit of peril, and not just like, hey, I'm a cat that knows he's going to land on his feet.
You want to see that artery in his temple pulse a couple of times?
Yeah, just a little bit of, oh no, give me one of those moments. There's not a ton of those moments. I will say this though, can we say that this is the smartest dog in cinematic history? I think.
Disagree.
Oh, okay.
You haven't seen that Call of the Wild with that buck yet either.
Let me tell you something. I've stepped in on that movie a couple times and watched for it. It's disgusting. Like the fact that you can't even be bothered to get a real dog. You're going to CGI the dog in there, and man, oh man, is Harrison Ford phoning in that performance like you have never seen before. It feels like the pitch was, hey Harrison, we're going to have a movie. You're the only cast member. You're going to just pretend there's a CGI dog there, and he's like, there's no one with me. Sign me up.
It seemed like a combination.
Inspector Gadget's dog. Inspector Gadget's dog is smarter than.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. I saw that dog break out a graphing calculator once.
Watch this. I could play Breakout.
What'd you think of this little sub-story with the pickpocket? Toby Jones, a beloved actor here at Hero Movie Podcast. He does the voice of Mr. Silk, the pickpocket. I guess that's a funny little diversion. This movie, like I think the pickpocket storyline would be kind of interesting, but it also kind of feels very superfluous. This whole movie has some like moments that are probably great, but I lose so much interest in between those great moments that I don't really have full appreciation for, like the big pirate sword fighting scene on the ship that's on fire, or the thing I most remembered about my first viewing was the whole airplane in the desert when Haddock belches into the gas tank and it gives it like jet fuel because of his alcoholic breath. Like some of those moments that probably would have been more fun if the connecting of the dots had been a little more interesting. I would have liked this movie more.
Well, also because everything's always ratcheted to 11 in this movie, that whenever you have those big moments like that, it doesn't mean anything.
And it's also
a problem.
It's also a big problem when your title character, you're sitting here and you're not real sure why he's going from point A to point B. Like I'm not fully convinced. Like his motivation is to write a story for the newspaper, I guess, but I'm not convinced that's enough motivation to go to the lengths he's going to. Like some of that.
They broke his toy boat.
You've never. Yeah, he paid £2 for it. Come on. What do you. He's never like he's looking for adventure at every corner. Like this is the guy who comes home and just like mail was delivered to my house. Where did this come from? Time for an adventure.
To use some phrases that Alfred Hitchcock liked to use about pushing a story forward. The MacGuffin wasn't that great for me. The plot coupons, what takes you from point A to B to C to D to E to F, like what's your excuse from getting from set piece to set piece? None of those really worked for me here.
Now, I will say this. One of the things that we kind of talked about this over at Clone Wars 30 Questions, wherever you find finer podcasts. This is another animated thing where we have, as we've learned to properly connect it, an athletic camera. Because this is another great thing of Spielberg doing that kind of like crazy Raiders of the Lost Ark stuff. But when you are living in a virtual world, your camera can go anywhere and do absolutely anything. And they do that in this movie. And I think to pretty decent effect. I mean, you may not... The story behind all of the action and everything may not be up to snuff, but like when the action scenes are there, and we'll talk a little bit about the frequency of those, but when they're there, they tend to be pretty good, at least executed very well. But again, coming from Spielberg, not a huge surprise there.
Oh man, that's another good reason to compare this with Raiders is, famously, Raiders of the Lost Ark ends exactly the same way, even if Indiana Jones was never born. Right? Yeah. Like he actually changes nothing in the story, but it's super compelling because those plot coupons and those MacGuffins, we're invested in those and we're following Wise going from point A to B to C to D. Here, this story goes very, very differently if Tintin's not involved. Like he does push this story along and gets it where it's going, but I have no interest in why this story's taking place. Like if this story turned out differently, I don't think I would have cared.
And do you think that that's like a result of being an American audience, or just within the storytelling within this unit in and of itself?
I think it's the storytelling here, where I really think they were so focused on the visuals. I mean, I would also compare this to a Peter Jackson movie, King Kong, where you have beloved intellectual property, amazing special effects, and a story that is so boring I don't ever want to have to sit through it again. And we're kind of getting that here. I think they're so focused on sort of recreating some of the things that they're not. I mean, this movie becomes infinitely more intriguing to me if, let's just say, Daniel Craig's character, Sakharine, let's say he kidnaps Snowy at some point, and then Tintin really has a reason to want to catch up to Sakharine to get Snowy back. But to think he wants to just solve this puzzle, and that's the only reason he's sticking with it, it's hard for me to really go with.
Oh, I did have a thought.
Look at it like this. We've seen a movie now where there is a construction crane fight, and it's boring. Why is that? Why is that the case?
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of the opposite. I could even get with this if he found himself, most of the comics, he's going to write a story and then he gets caught up in this intrigue that he has to escape. So he's like, it's like Die Hard. Like he didn't ask for this adventure. He just found himself there and he's got to find a way to make it out. Die Hard's a totally different movie. If McClane is across town, hears on the news that terrorists have taken over the building and he runs there to stop them just because he wants to, totally different movie, right?
No, 100%.
And not only that, but it's a lot lamer. It's sort of Tintin-y that way.
Yeah, because Tintin's comics work really well because he's going to write a story. Once he gets there, then he becomes hunted or trapped or pinned in some way, and he has to use his wits to escape. Here, he's chasing the trouble. The trouble's not chasing him. Man.
Tintin and Die Hard. That sounds great.
I want to see that.
Hey, listen, this Die Hard could have used a plucky dog, though. Let's be honest. Chews through wires and,
Oh, especially if it was a CGI dog that sort of talked but sort of didn't talk, kind of a Scooby-Doo style.
Yippee-ki-yay, Cocker Spaniel.
I like that.
Just chewing at Alan Rickman's ankles. I'd watch that. But I think I wanted to get back for a hot second to the whole wallet subplot and everything. That seemed just mighty British to me.
Well, here's the thing with that is a very charming thing, that the guy isn't actually stealing the money. he just loves wallets. Like, that is a very charming thing.
I'm a kleptomaniac. What's that mean? That means he doesn't like outdoor spaces.
He doesn't like large spaces. But and they're all set up like it's a library. And all of these things are incredibly, incredibly charming. And it doesn't mean a thing.
Not really.
You see it.
And
that is such a bummer, because this whole thing is very charming and very cool, and I didn't care, and I wanted to.
And I think if this movie had been more Mr. Silk the pickpocket and less flaming ships in Morocco, it would have been a better movie. Especially I love, Nick Frost and Simon Pegg, the Thompson and Thompson duo. I like how they get there and they're too dumb when they've got him red-handed to even comprehend what's going on. I love that. They're like, we got the pickpocket's jacket and your wallet was in it, so clearly you were one of his victims. Like, I just love how they're absolutely clueless, and that's a lot of fun. And that kind of goes back, you say very British. That's kind of a Sherlock Holmes, how the Scotland Yard detectives are just absolute idiots and he has to come in and figure everything out. Like, I think that could have been a lot more fun with a smaller story, though from the very beginning, part of the appeal of Tintin, and especially in a time where we didn't have a lot of high quality photographs, definitely no color photographs in newspapers. These were like travel logs, because Hergé would draw like these very, very, I won't say realistic, but I'll say faithful depictions of places like Moscow and Berlin and places you wouldn't necessarily want to go in 1920s and 30s and 40s Europe, but maybe you want to see the pictures of them. So traveling's always been a big part of it, but I think you make this movie a smaller story, you've got a better movie.
Yeah, and speaking of smaller, making it kind of smaller and everything, like when they get stranded there in the desert and everything, and the flashbacks to the boat, while a lot of that's kind of cool, they almost overdo it, because we're going back and forth like, what, 3-4 times, something like that. It's a little much. It feels like that could have been condensed down and you really got the same sort of, feeling out of it, instead of going like, you're almost in that flashback so long that you don't go, oh, wait a minute, was he doing this, or was this that's right, it was like an ancestor type thing. Like, it's a little much.
And I also think if this movie was made by someone who didn't have like the Hollywood royalty status that Spielberg has, there's no way this gets a PG. There's a guy who gets an Interpol officer gets gunned down from the street in a doorway and drops dead. There's a lot of gun violence here. One of the characters' major trait is that he's suffering from crippling alcoholism, and there's a lot of jokes and use of alcohol there. I mean, this is stuff in a live action movie gets you a PG-13. And here, I think it's simply because it's Spielberg that he's able to kind of brute force his way to getting this a PG.
You don't understand.
There is a weird line in this movie with its alcoholism, right? Because at one point, it's like, he is a hilarious alcoholic. And then they shift it at some point to where it becomes a character flaw and a problem of his.
And one that he solves.
Say what?
And one that he kind of solves. I mean, he sobers up for a while.
Right. And so, like, but it's just weird the line they ride with this character. Like, you can't do both things. You can be one or the other.
But yeah, exactly. He sobers up, and their thing is just like, hey, we got to get him back to normal so he'll help us out proper. Let's give him a little bit of booze.
Yeah, and they show him consuming a lot of alcohol. And normally for a PG animated children's show, you might have the guy who's a drunk because he's hiccuping a lot and he's stumbling and he's kind of for comedic effect. They don't usually show them consuming the alcohol on screen.
And he's literally pulling out bottles that are clearly labeled whiskey. And so it's not like we're just going like, oh, it's just something or other, kids. He's just like, no, this is straight up whiskey. We're telling you.
Pretty sure he's drinking rubbing alcohol, the stuff that's for medicinal spirits. That's essentially rubbing alcohol. And a lot of gunplay. You just don't see a lot of gunplay in 2011 in a PG movie. And Spielberg is pretty famous for getting stuff rated PG over the years. Isn't he kind of given credit for why they had to come up with PG-13 because his movies were getting PGs?
Yes.
Behind, you got a little bit of Gremlins, a little bit of Poltergeist in there, so it gets people on edge. But you're 100% right. He is that the Hollywood royalty does allow him to do these things, because if this was if a French company produced this and then tried to put it out in America, we'd be like, No. We're gonna be making this at least PG-13 at this point because there's too much drinking, too much shooting and stuff. But yeah, I think old Spielberg there kind of pulls a legacy card. Not that the MPAA could ever be swayed by any sort of measure or anything like that, because they're above board at all times for all reasons. Thank you, MPAA. You've all made our lives much, much safer.
John Williams did the music for this.
Well, it is a Steven Spielberg film, and John Williams had yet to retire at this point. I think he does I think his music is great in this. I thought the kind of Saul Bassian animated intro and everything, I enjoyed that a whole bunch. Combine that with John Williams' music, fun times there. So that's something to recommend.
And the only Oscar nomination this movie got was for John Williams.
Yeah, you figured it would get some special effects and stuff because, again, I said, for 2011, these still hold up pretty darn well.
I think the problem with the Academy for this movie might have been, was it special effects or was it animation? Like the animation people considered it special effects. The special effects people considered it animation. It might have been in this weird in-between place. Yeah,
and then, like I said, there's still a good bit of that with any mocap performances. Is that a true performance? Is it not? Is it enhanced by other things? Can we give that person specific credit? So, yeah, that was probably still under that line of questioning.
Are you kind of surprised there's still not any kind of award for a VO or a mocap performance? Because there's, plenty of decorated animated mocap type movies out there. I'm kind of surprised there's not some sort of category for best voice performance or something.
There certainly should be. There should be an award for that, any kind of like motion capture performance, and of course one that a lot of people are pushing for these days, which I think truly deserves it, is a stunts category. There are, especially, and we're back in kind of a new renaissance of stunts and everything, that, more and more stunt people are putting out some really amazing stuff. And they should be, nominated and talked about more than they are in just their regular kind of, because they have like stunt awards and stuff like that, but no one knows what that is. Put them in the Academy Awards.
Did either of you guys have a favorite part or a favorite thing about this movie?
I think that's the tough part with the movie is kind of like Sean said, is that it's overstuffed. There's a lot of things that go on, and the fact that the show itself continues to just roll. It never really stops. You never really catch your breath. We don't start this by, going, hey, here's Tintin's day-to-day life. We get maybe 4 minutes there while he's getting his picture painted and looking at a boat. Outside of that, it's, your boots on the ground after that, man. And nothing stops, nothing slows down, and we don't get to learn anything. And I think that's one of the biggest problems is just the overstuffedness, no time to, kind of just let us all take a deep breath and live in this world that you've just placed before us that's unlike anything that we had seen up until that point.
What do you think, Sean? And I think it's not a real good recommendation when I have to struggle to think what was my favorite part of it on what is a well-made movie, I guess, in some ways.
I think the Mr. Silk pickpocket stuff is my favorite. I have a massive problem with Haddock in this movie. I think that Andy Serkis plays him way too loud and does there's way too much going on with that character. I don't find any of the Haddock stuff interesting, which is a problem since he's in 95% of the movie.
Yeah.
I like the tertiary characters in this movie. Like Thompson and Thompson are great, but really my favorite part is the Mr. Silk pickpocket stuff.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree with you on that. And I think that the math didn't work out, like the idea to make Tintin underperformed and Haddock overperformed was supposed to give us like this golden mean where the couple came across as an interesting pair, but I think it just failed twice instead of meeting in the middle.
Yeah, I totally agree with that statement.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, before we get down to our final rating here and everything, we have to ask ourselves one of the most important questions that anyone can ever ask is how does this movie relate back 1-to-1 with Sylvester Stallone?
Well, thank you, Adam. I have a prepared statement. Have you ever thought to yourself, how do I live my very best life? I'm here today to speak to you about Morris Arisote, who is very clearly living his best life. He grew up and realized one day he had no trade, no capacity for learning, no talent he was good at, and decided at a very young age, if he couldn't do anything that was going to benefit society, he was going to become a Teamster. And that's exactly what he did. Why learn things? Why become a better person and contribute to society when you can drive a truck for the film industry and make as much money as a really terrible lawyer or an accountant with a coke problem? Morris Arisote knew his limitations, of which there were many, and he decided that he was going to drive trucks for a living, and I applaud him for it. Morris Arisote was a driver on Tintin, a movie that was made entirely in a computer, so he probably didn't have to do much driving, which is another thing that Teamsters enjoy, not doing anything at all. Morris Arisote was also a driver on Rocky Balboa, starring the veal parmesan enthusiast Sylvester Stallone. So for those of you listening out there who have no talent, are completely unintelligent, and you're currently not the president of the United States of America, maybe you should think about becoming a film Teamster. I'm Sean Kovacs, and always, you are welcome.
I got to put my cigarette out? Seems like a lot of work. Well, here at Here Movie Podcast, we have our own patented Robin rating system. If you'd like to check that out, head on down to facebook.com/Here Movie Podcast. It's right there at the top of the screen. Bruce, where does Tintin, The Adventures of Tintin, for the actual full title, fall on the Robin rating system for you?
You know, this is a weird one because I'm not going to give this a good Robin rating, but I would kind of like to see them try this again. I know it's one of those shows, one of those movies where the sequel's been in perpetual development as recently as like not really last summer yet, but this past summer. They're still talking about, when's this movie going to get made, the sequel. The visuals impressed me, and maybe I'm not like super sophisticated when it comes to understanding animation and what looks good and what doesn't look good, but I was really impressed watching this the second time around and kind of surprised I haven't seen anything else that looks like this. But the story just did nothing for me. I think we've made that pretty clear. I'm going to have to give this like the Stephanie Brown. It's like, a competently made movie, but I could have napped through it, not really missed anything. So I'm giving it that, even though strangely I want to see them try again and do it right the next time.
Yeah. All right. Sean, what do you got?
Stephanie Brown for me, too. To give you an example of how difficult this movie is to watch, I fell asleep not once, not twice, 3 different times trying to watch this movie the other day. And so that is not the mark of a great movie. It was very difficult to get through. It is a Stephanie Brown.
Yeah.
I'm at a Tim Drake. Or Damien rather. I'm right in the middle. Because to me, it's like, it's good. There's enough of it to recommend, but you're absolutely right. One of the sad parts about this is that, like, especially nowadays at home, it's pretty much impossible. But this was a 3D movie. And in 3D, it actually works pretty darn well. So, like, if there's any weird kind of happenstance where you can watch this in 3D, it is a visual feast for 3D. Doesn't work quite as well at home. But, again, I do remember even watching it in 3D, especially by the time you get down to the crane battle and everything. You've seen about one too many CGI fights at that point. And, like, it doesn't feel like there's a ton of stakes. And that's where ultimately a lot of this movie falters, is that how much of it looks so real but yet so fake at the same time that you're like, does it even really matter? And at the end of the day, it doesn't feel like it does, and that's one of the problems with the movie. So that's where I'm going to go kind of right there in the middle. Damien Wayne, now just only a little bit better than you guys, but I am a self-admitted Steven Spielberg mark, so I don't want to say the man can do no wrong, because he can, but I tend to lean a little bit more forgiving than others. Speaking of forgiving, we don't know how we're going to forgive ourselves if we don't head out to the theater next week to talk about Bloodshot. That's right. Vin Diesel's probably going to talk about family, and maybe there's a car in it. Who knows?
Is that next week, really?
That's next week. So,
wow.
You know, how many times do we get to talk? Is this a Valiant comic? Is that right? Or is it Dark Horse?
Sure is. It's Valiant.
Valiant, there you go.
Valiant.
Okay. Hey, I got it right out the bait. How about that? So, you know, we don't get a lot of Valiant comics, but, you know, we're going to be talking about this one and see if it sets the movie-going public ablaze. Probably not going to happen. But we'll do that next time. Until then, Bruce, where might we find more of your work on the internet?
Just reminding people, if you haven't done it yet, go over to Heroes and Villains podcast. You can get in 6 perfectly sized doses the entire story that is Nerd Spawn Genesis.
So when you're just walking around doing your day and you're like, man, I need a little bit of entertainment, no better way to help yourself. Sean, where else could people go?
You can go to Clone Wars 30 Questions. We just finished up a new episode this week. It is by far the most fun that I have doing podcasts lately, because it's just a weird little thing. So even if you're not a fan of the show, you should come on by and take a listen.
That is one of the funny things, because like when reading the reviews on iTunes, there's at least one review that goes, I don't even watch this show and I listen to this podcast because it's just entertaining and funny. And honestly, because with what the Clone Wars show itself does, you know, you're looking at 22 minutes or less worth of material, and we're doing an hour-long podcast, so we've got to mine some very interesting stuff. So if you're looking for informative Star Wars content, but also comedy gold, check out Clone Wars 30 Questions wherever you find podcasts. And we'd really appreciate that.
Philosophical discussion pops up there.
Oh, tons. I mean, listen, we're smart and funny. I mean, you know, anybody can be funny, but we also ask people every now and then, open up your mind, expand a little bit, you know, greaten yourself. And you do that by listening to Star Wars or Clone Wars 30 Questions. Go check that out wherever you find our podcast. That is it, everybody. Join us next week when we're talking Vin Diesel and Bloodshot for Sweet Sean's and Kovacs from the internet. Bruce Leslie, I'm Adam Portrais. Stay super, everybody.
Bye, Marty and Phoebe.